Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Mi'as Hashem Daf Ayin Zayin Amid Beis. Before we begin, our learning should be a schos for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayamu Bein Bayabasha, Ha'makim Yerachem Aleihem V'yotziem Mitzara L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira U'Mishibad L'Gula Hashta Bagala U'Vizman Kariv V'Namar Amen. The Rebbe Shalom should make that all of the captives that are being held should be released. Mamish immediately, they should be well. The boots on the ground, everyone should be safe. And Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem should be safe. Also, our learning should be a schos refuah shalema for Ariel Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and for Meir ben Chayis Sarah. They should have a refuah shalema b'karayv b'sarich shar chayei Yisrael. So we begin today on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph at the bottom with a new Siman Kuf Ayin Hey Dine Berchas HaTov והמטיב al Hayayin, the halachos that govern the making of the bracha of HaTov והמטיב on wine, Uboy Vav Seifim, and here we have 6 Seifim. I found that this is a halacha, I think the lashon that they use, it's a halacha refuyahu biyodayim. A lot of people are aware conceptually of the idea of making HaTov והמטיב, but the halachos and the guidelines of the bracha of HaTov והמטיב are refuyahi biyodam. They're weak. Most people don't know precisely what the halachos of HaTov והמטיב are, and therefore it's kind of like, make HaTov והמטיv. I don't know the halachos. The HaTov והמטיv is not said, especially nowadays. Baruch Hashem, I guess, there's people have the ability. People tend to have more wine on their Shabbos and Yom Tov tables than in days gone by. So definitely, there's very often the opportunity to make this bracha of HaTov והמטיv, and therefore it's definitely incumbent upon us to understand the halachos and the guidelines. So, with that being said, let's get started. So before we even begin the words of the Mechaber, let me give you a drop of background from the Gemara in Brachas Nun Tes Amid Beis. The Gemara says at the bottom of Nun Tes Amid Beis, V'amar Rabbi Yosef bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosef bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Af al pisha amru shina yayin einoi tzarech levarech. Even though we have already learned that when you bring out a new bottle of wine, so you sat down to have your Suda. We learned that the bracha of Hamaitzi does not cover the bracha Rishain on Yayin, because Yayin is Rosh v'Rishain l'chal hamashkim. So therefore, you must make a bar priagafen on your wine, b'sayich hasuda. And now, you made a bar priagafen on a bottle of Malvasia, and you had 1 cup of Malvasia, and now later in the Suda, you want to have another cup. So we learned the halacha is you don't have to make another bracha. You make 1 bar priagafen, and that bar priagafen covers all the wine that you're going to drink during the meal. So that's what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara says, even though Rabbi Yochanan says, Af al pisha amru, even though we said shinu yayin einoi tzarech levarech, that with another cup of wine you don't have to make another bar priagafen, and that's true even if it's shinu yayin, even if it's a different wine. So let's say you made a bar priagafen on a case of cream malaga, and now later on in the Suda, together with the prime rib, they brought you a Cabernet. So now it's shinu yayin, it's a different wine. The halach is still you don't make another bar priagafen. Aval omer baruch HaTov והמטיב, but you should make the bracha of HaTov והמטיv. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam HaTov והמטיב. You should make a bracha of HaTov והמטיv on the second wine. That's what the Gemara says. Says Rashi, shinu yayin. What does this mean? That you should make a bracha of HaTov והמטיv if you have shinu yayin, if you bring out a different wine. Says Rashi, shasa b'yayin suda, shasa yayin b'seuda. If you drank wine during the Suda, ve'eviu lo yayin acher, now they brought you a different wine, toiv min harishain, that's better than the first wine, Ein tzarich levarach bar priagafen. You still don't have to make another bar priagafen because the first bar priagafen pottered all the wine that you're going to drink during the meal, but you have to make a bracha of ha'tov והמטיב. So what's the critical piece of information that Rashi just filled in for me over here? Rashi just told me that this question of ha'tov והמטיב is only when the second wine is mishubach min harishon, when it's better than the first wine. And in that case, Rashi's telling me that the Gemara is really telling you two chidushim. The Gemara is telling you, A, the first bar priagafen that you made on your first cup of wine covers all the wine during the Suda, even if the later wine that you drink is a better wine than the first wine. It's still covered by the same bracha rishayna. The other thing that Rabbi Yochanan is telling me is that there's a new bracha. When you drink a better wine later in the Suda, there's a bracha of ha'tov והמטיב. You drink a wine that's the same as the first wine. You drink a wine that's garua min harishayin. It's less chashuv than the first one. Then there is no ha'tov והמטיב. But, says Rashi, if they're giving you a wine that's a better wine than the first wine that you had by the Suda, then there's this new bracha, the bracha of ha'tov והמטיב. So says Rashi. Tosfos brings down a shitas harashbam, where the Rashbam spells out specifically. He says, Dafka kishe ha'achroin meshubach mevarchen ha'tov והמטיב. It's only when the second wine is more chashuv than the first wine, that's the only time you make ha'tov והמטיב. Aval b'kiyoytze bai, but if the two wines are equal in chashivas, loy, then you don't make ha'tov והמטיב. But at the end of Tosfos takes the Rashbam down a notch. Tosfos says, what if you drink one wine, now they bring you a second wine, and you don't know if the second wine is more chashuv than the first wine. Now let's put this into perspective. You know, nowadays, as soon as the bottle hits the table, we kind of know what wine is more chashuv than the other wine. We know that this was a $7 bottle. We know that this is a $14 bottle. We know this is a $30 bottle. We know this is a $130 bottle, right? We know this is a special reserve. We know this is a standard red table wine. So we know instantly what's considered more chashuv than the other. Back in the day, it wasn't necessarily that way. They brought you a jug. You didn't know what was in the jug. You could sniff it, right? But until you tasted it, you didn't necessarily know if it's more chashuv or less chashuv. So says Tosfos, when the Rashbam says that you make ha'tov והמטיב if the second wine is more chashuv, the Rashbam would say, even if you're misupik that the second wine might be more chashuv, you would make ha'tov והמטיב. So here we have this background. We have the Gemara, we have Rabbi Yochanan that introduces to us this concept of the bracha ha'tov והמטיב, and very shortly in the Mishnah Berurah, we'll see an explanation of the meaning of this bracha. Beautiful Mishnah Berurah. So Rabbi Yochanan introduces the concept of ha'tov והמטיב. Between Rashi and the Rashbam, what we see right away is that in order to make this bracha of ha'tov והמטיב, either we have to know that the second wine is more chashuv, or at least we have to be mesupik that the second wine might be more chashuv. But if the two wines are the same, and I would venture to say that means if you made a bar priagafen on cream malaga, and now you're having some Concord grape, and maybe you'll have some tokay, I'm dating myself, or whatever. All of these wines are kind of the same. On the other hand, if they give you some Concord grape, and then later by the prime rib, they bring out a nice bottle of Cabernet, the Cabernet is a more chashuv wine. So now you have a more chashuv wine, and this is when you would start to have the question of making ha'tov והמטיב. Now we're going to see that there are about, I think, 5 different tanoim. There are 5 different conditions that you're going to need in order to make the bracha of ha'tov והמטיב. So now let's get into the Shulchan Aruch. Siman kofayin hey dina berchas ha'tov והמטיב alayayin ubay vav seifim, says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Heviu lahem yayin acher. If they bring you a different wine. Einay mevarich bar priagafen. You don't make another bar priagafen. Right away, says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut an aleph. What's at play over here? Yayin acher. They brought you a different wine. Ritzayin loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, shemetchila berech al yayin shebesaycha mazayin. You already made a bar priagafen on a glass of wine during the Suda. And now they brought you more wine. The Mechaber is telling me, even if the second wine is a different wine, like the Mechaber said, yayin acher, they brought a different wine. Even though it's a different wine, it's still covered by the first bracha bar priagafen that you made on the first wine that you drank b'say chasuda. Where we got into the weeds of that. But basically the halacha is, you make a bar priagafen on a glass of wine b'say chasuda, it covers all the wine that you're going to drink for the rest of the suda, even if it's a yayin acher. Let's go back into the Mechaber. So einam mevarich bar priagafen, aval, however, says the Mechaber, mevarich alav ha'tov v'hametiv. But on the second wine, you have to make a bracha of ha'tov v'hametiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Bays, bottom line, here on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Ha'tov v'hametiv. Now, what do the words ha'tov v'hametiv mean? Ha'tov, Baruch Atah Hashem, gebenched is the Rabbanu Shalom, Elokeinu, our God, Melech Ha'olam, the King of the universe. Ha'tov, who is good, Ha'tov, the good, v'hameitiv, and who does good. The Rabbanu Shalom is a meitiv. We'll get back to that in a separate video that maybe I'll record today in context of today's current events. But in any case, the Rabbanu Shalom is Ha'tov v'hameitiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hu ha'ida al ribuy hayayin. This is thanking the Rabbanu Shalom. You sat down by a Suda, you had one glass of wine. Now they're bringing you another glass of wine of another type. This is ribuy yayin. Baruch Hashem, the Rabbanu Shalom is being mizaki you. The Rabbanu Shalom is being meitiv to you. He's being good to you. And you have ribuy yayin. You have not only a lot of wine, but you have different wines. V'hu ha'ida ribuy yayin sheniz damin loy, that you have. Void kasva svarim, and then he brings down over here, this comes from a Rabbeinu Bechaya. Void kasva svarim, the svarim write, tam lenusach zeh, a reason for the nusach of this bracha. Ki yadua, because it's well known, says the Rabbeinu Bechaya, sheha adam tzarech lemayit betanugei ha'olam. A person has to be very careful not to get too attached to the pleasures of this world. V'yayin haloi mevi lidei simcha. We know what yayin is capable of doing. Yayin brings simcha. You can get a little bit high, a little bit tipsy from yayin. V'yacha lovay lidei kalas roish. And yayin has the potential to bring to kalas roish. Lakach sidru nusach zeh shel ha'tov v'hameitiv. Therefore, the Chazal were mesaken that we should make a bracha of ha'tov v'hameitiv. At face value, the bracha of ha'tov v'hameitiv is like the Mishnah Berurah told us at the outset, where we're giving hoidah to the Rabbanu Shalom for ribuy yayin. But it also has an underlying message. And that is, says the Rabbeinu Bechaya, sheyadua sheberchas ha'tov v'hameitiv shebeberchas ha'mazayin. We have a nusach of a bracha of ha'tov v'hameitiv in benching. That is the fourth bracha of berchas ha'mazayin. The first bracha of benching is hazan. The second one is ala aretz v'ala mazayin. The third one is Yerushalayim, uvnei Yerushalayim ha'kodesh. The fourth bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. That next bracha, that is the bracha that's called ha'tov v'hameitiv. Now that bracha was a takanas chazal. That bracha of benching is midrabanan. Why were they misakin that bracha? Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's yadua sheberchas ha'tov v'hameitiv shebeberchas ha'mazayin tiknu al harugei beitar shenitnu l'kvura. One of the great tragedies of all time that occurred to Klal Yisrael by the Golus, by the Churban Bayis. After the Churban Bayis was the Harugei Beitar, where the city of Beitar was wiped out, tens and tens, hundreds of thousands of people. And the corpses were not nitan l'kfura. It took a while until the dead were buried. when finally there was Zoichet to Kfura, the Chazal were masak in this bracha of HaTov והמטיב. Therefore, it says to Rabbeinu Bechaya that the bracha of HaTov והמטיב that we make on Ribu Yayin has a sobering connotation as well. Val Yedei Zeh Yizkar Yom Hamisa, by mentioning HaTov והמטיב, it will sober us a little bit. It will remind us of Yom Hamisa. We're thinking about Haruge Beitar. We're thinking about the corpses that would need to Lekvura. It will remind us of our own mortality. And that will protect us from coming to Kalas Rosh and going too much Achar Hayayin. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. This concept of the bracha HaTov והמטיב is only when you're drinking yayin b'soicha suda. You're not, or in the bracket says the Mishnah Berurah, shayu mesubin lishtais b'loy achila, or if you have a haseba, which means together with 2 or 3 people, where you're sitting down to drink b'loy achila, and they bring you a second wine, like we'll see later on in Sifhei in the Ramah. But how about the kais if you're benching ala kais? So imagine this. You sat down by a Suda, you washed, you sat down by a Suda. In the middle of the Suda, you made a bar priagofen on a glass of wine, on a glass of Concord grape. Now the Suda is over, it's time for benching, and they mechabed you to bench. And they want you to bench ala kais, and they give you a Cabernet to bench ala kais. So now you're getting a second glass of wine that is meshubach, it's more chashuv than the first glass of wine. And you're going to make a bar priagofen after benching on that kais. Do you make a HaTov והמטיב on that kais? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Because this is not, the second kais is not b'saycha mazon. The second kais is after the Suda. It's after benching. You even have to make another bar priagofen on it. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, ain't tzarich levarach alav brikas HaTov והמטיv av shehu min yayin acher. Over there, you're not going to make HaTov והמטיv, even though it's a different wine and even though it's a better wine. It's a more chashuv wine. You're still not going to make HaTov והמטיv. Why not? Says the Mishnah Berurah, a very interesting reason why. Because you're going to pater the need to make HaTov והמטיv on the yayin of the kais shel Birkas Hamazon by the bracha of HaTov והמטיv in Birkas Hamazon. Very interesting. Magen Avram. Balele Pesach on Pesach by the Seder. Toiv lechatchila sheloi lishtois oid min acher shel yayin b'soicha suda. Very interesting. I have to look into this halacha a little bit more. But the Mishnah Berurah says, and I could see this being very negeya. The Mishnah Berurah says that by the Seder night, so you're going to drink the first kais by Kiddush, then you're going to drink the second kais by Gal Yisrael. That's all yayin. That's before the Suda. Then you're going to come to Shulchan Aruch. Now by Shulchan Aruch, you're going to eat a beautiful meal. And you might want to bring out a nice bottle of Cabernet. Or a nice bottle of Chardonnay. All right? I don't know, but you might want to bring out a nice bottle to have by Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mishnah Berurah that's a little bit problematic. He says, B'leilei Pesach, toyev lechatchila. Doesn't say it's usher. He says, lechatchila it is good. Shaloi lishtais oid min acher shel yayin b'soicha suda. You should not bring out another wine by the Suda. A different kind of wine, a more chashuv wine. Kidei shelo yitztarich levarach alav HaTov והמטיב, so that you shouldn't generate a chiyuv of HaTov והמטיv. Why? V'yenirek tzas kemoisef al hakaisos. Because imagine what's happening now. You made Kiddush and you drank the first kais of the Daled kaises. You made a bracha of Gal Yisrael and you drank the second kais of the Daled kaises. Now you're sitting down by your Suda. They bring you a Cabernet. You pick up the Cabernet. It looks like this is another one of the kaises. Well, we have 5 kaises. What's going on here? So it's nearer to just drink a glass of wine. That's fine. But to make a special bracha of HaTov והמטיv on a glass of wine during the Suda, says, it's nirek tzas kemoisef ala kaisos. Ach, imu tzameh, if you're thirsty, v'choshek lishtais bimenu, and you're thirsty, so you want to drink, and the Cabernet is what you have, Yakal Avarakal of HaTov HaMetiv, you could make HaTov HaMetiv. So he says it's Tov L'Chatchila, that you should stay away from it. In the Sharitziyonos Cotton Gimel, he says, Avalikach Yayin Acher Tov L'Minyan HaKoisais Gufa. But how about a different case? How about if you drink Concord grape for the first kais, and now by the second kais, you want to have Cabernet. So now you're having a more chosh of a second kais of Yayin by one of the daled kaises itself. Avalikach Yayin Acher Tov L'Minyan HaKoisais Gufa. Let's say you drank the first kais of Kiddush, and you didn't like the wine. So now for the second kais, you want to use a different wine. And you're using a more chosh of a wine. Everybody would agree that you could take a different wine for the second kais, and you're going to make a bar priagofen, because we paskin, there are those that paskin that you don't make a bar priagofen on the second kais by the seder, but we paskin that you do make a bar priagofen on the second kais, and then you would have to make a ha'tov ha'metiv. Now, don't walk away. This is just very, very important. Today's shir is going to be the first shir on the bracha ha'tov ha'metiv. Do not walk away from today's shir with a psak halacha l'maisa of when you should make ha'tov ha'metiv or when you should not make ha'tov ha'metiv, because we're not going to cover all of the tanoim of ha'tov ha'metiv in today's shir. So the Mishnah Berurah just said, if let's say you had Concord grape, the Sharitzion just said, Chavetz Chaim in the Sharitzion just said, if you had Concord grape for the first kais, you had a Cabernet for the second kais, so you're going to make a ha'tov ha'metiv by the second kais. But that is going to be dependent upon all of the other tanoim of ha'tov ha'metiv. So I just want to caution you, don't walk away with psak halacha l'maisa on the bracha of ha'tov ha'metiv just from today's shir in isolation. Okay, now let's turn back to Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Well, there's only one word left on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, Haga. We got to see the Ramah. So, just to recap what the Mechaber told us so far. The Mechaber told us you're drinking Yayin b'sayich hasuda, b'sayich hamazon. So you made a bar priagofen on a glass of wine. That bar priagofen covers all the wine you're going to drink for the rest of the Suda. Even if it's a different min, even if it's a different type of wine, even if it's a better wine. It's all covered by the first bar priagofen that you made. But the Mechaber introduced us to the concept of ha'tov v'ha'metiv. And in the words of the Mechaber didn't give us yet any tanoim. What the Mechaber told us was, they bring you a second wine, you got to make ha'tov v'ha'metiv. Haga, says the Ramah. Avagav she'en loy oid min harishon. Says the Ramah that this idea that you have to make ha'tov v'ha'metiv on the second wine, that's true even if you have no more of the first wine. Even if the first wine that they brought you, you finished the bottle. So there's no more of the first wine. Now they gave you a second wine, you still have to make ha'tov v'ha'metiv. What's the still? What's going on here? Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, and we'll see that we actually don't paskin like this Ramah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting gimel. Avagav she'en loy. Ayin b'magen Avram b'shem paiskim. Take a look at the Magen Avram in the name of many paiskim, and the Sharitzion gives you quite a list. Sheyesh deos bazeh. There's a lot of shitas on this. Valkein, and therefore hechriu ledina. The Magen Avram is machriya halacha l'maisa. The im yesh lahem min harishain, that if you still have more of the first wine, vehivi you asheni, and now they brought you a second wine, kidei sheyitamu yayin acher mishuna min harishain. They brought you the second wine. Why? Not because they ran out of the first wine. They brought you the second wine because you drank your first glass of Concord grape. Then by the prime rib, you leaned over to the Concord grape, and the Balabaya said, no. Don't have Concord grape together with the prime rib. Let me get you a nice Cabernet. So now, why did they bring you the Cabernet? They brought you the Cabernet because of the chashivus of the Cabernet, so that you should drink a different wine. Then, mevarchet alav ha'tov ha'metiv. That's when you make ha'tov ha'metiv. But if you wiped out the first bottle of wine, so there is none left, and then by the prime rib, somebody said, it would be nice to have some wine with this. Oh, let me see what I got. Oh, I found a Cabernet. In that case, imkain loy makma shinui heviu. Then the second wine did not come so that you should taste it and you should have this more chush of a wine. It came because you ran out of the first wine. In that case, the Magen Avram brings down from any paiskin ein mevarchin alav. Then you don't make the bracha of HaTov HaMetiv. Why? She'ein bazer ribui tova kol kach. Because we said that the basic understanding of the bracha of HaTov HaMetiv is haidah to the Rabbeinu Shalom al ribui yayin. Ribui yayin is pshat. I have one bottle of wine on the table. Now they brought me a second bottle of wine. That's ribui yayin. But I ran out of the first bottle. I got none left. So now I'm taking out the second bottle. That's not the same ribu yayin that we want to give haidah on. And here we see right away the first, not the first tanai, but another tanai that we have. The first tanai that we had already was that the second bottle has to be meshubach. We're going to see it spelled out. We didn't spell it out yet, but we saw it. I gave it to you from the Gemara, from Rashi and the Rashbam, that it has to be meshubach, or at least it has to be a suffix that the second bottle is meshubach. Now we see also that we paskin lamaisa that there has to be some left of the first wine when the second wine comes out. If there's none left from the first wine, we don't make HaTov HaMetiv. Now let's continue in the Mechaber. Top line, Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber, V'lav dafka heviu lehem mechodosh. When I'm telling you, says the Mechaber, that you have to make HaTov HaMetiv on the second wine, it's lav dafka that they brought you this wine mechodosh, that you didn't have this wine. And what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say is that what the Mechaber means is, it doesn't have to be that you didn't have this wine in your house. It could be you had this wine downstairs in the cellar, so you knew about the existence of this wine. In other words, again, it's not pshat that you were sitting by your Suda, you already drank some Concord grape, now somebody knocked on the door and brought you a gift. They brought you a Cabernet. You had no idea that this Cabernet existed. So over there, maybe you could understand, wow, HaTov HaMetiv. No. Even if you had the Cabernet the whole time downstairs in the cellar, you had it downstairs. Even if you had both of these wines available to you from the beginning of the Suda, you still make HaTov HaMetiv on the second one. Now let's go to the Mishnah Berurah and get into the weeds of this halacha that we just learned. From 30,000 feet, what the Mechaber just told me is, you might think that the idea of the bracha HaTov HaMetiv is, you were drinking one wine, and now, mamish, they brought you a second wine. You didn't know anything about this second wine. You didn't know that this second wine was even shayach. You didn't have it in the house. Somebody knocked on the door. Your neighbor wanted to send you a gift. He knew you were making a chosh of a suda. He knew you were making a daf yomi siyum. He wanted to give you a gift. He sent you a nice bottle of wine. Says the Mechaber, no. Even if you had the second bottle of wine, you just didn't bring it out. You had the second bottle of wine. Now you decided to bring it out. You still make HaTov HaMetiv. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah to see the details of this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Daled. V'lav dafka mechodosh ritzoynoi loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say, says the Chavetz Chaim, when he says this isn't only when they brought it to you mechodosh. What does that mean? Ritzoynoi loymar she'viu lehem ata babayis. It's not only that they just brought it now to your house. You can make HaTov HaMetiv even if you had both wines in the house all along. And according to the Mechaber, it could be you even had das to drink it. In other words, you sat down to the Suda and you brought out a bottle of Concord grape. You knew that you had the Cabernet downstairs. Not only you knew that you had the Cabernet downstairs, you were already planning on serving this Cabernet by the Suda. ukidul kame. But it wasn't out on the table when you made the original bar priagofen. So the mechaber is saying, this is the mechaber. We're going to see now different. But the mechaber is saying, you could even make HaTorah HaMeitiv if, when you sat down to make the menu for this Suda, you said, by the appetizer, I'm bringing out a bottle of Concord grape. So that you put, and by the prime rib, I'm bringing out a beautiful Cabernet. I'm going to keep the Cabernet downstairs in the fridge so it's nice and cold. Or for those that like red wine, room temperature, I'm going to keep it on the shelf downstairs, which is the way red wine is supposed to be. You're supposed to drink it. I'm going to keep it on the shelf downstairs, and I'm not going to bring it out until the prime rib is served. So you knew you had it in the house. You knew you were planning on serving it. But still, says the Mechaber, since Lamaisa, it was not on the table when you made the original Bar Priagofen, therefore, you could still make HaTorah HaMeitiv. Remember, you're not going to make a Bar Priagofen. Bar Priagofen was covered on the glass of Cabernet, covered all the wine that you're going to drink to the Suda. But you're going to make HaTorah HaMeitiv, even though you knew all along that it was going to come to the table. Since it wasn't on the table when you made the first Bar Priagofen, you're still eligible for HaTorah HaMeitiv. So says the Mechaber. But now let's continue in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'das halechem chamudais. It is the opinion of the lechem chamudais. If the wine was in your house when you made that bar priagofen, and you had in mind that you were going to drink it. So it's like I said, it was downstairs on the shelf, and when you prepared the menu, you already decided you're serving that Cabernet with the prime rib. Then it's as if it was sitting by you on the table when you made the bar priagofen. And then you do not make HaTorah HaMeitiv, and paskins the Mishnah Berurah was suffik brachas lahakil. This constitutes a suffik brachas. Why? Because we have deis. We have two different shitas. We have the Mechaber, who's telling us that under those circumstances you do make HaTorah HaMeitiv. We have the Lechem Chamudais, who tells me that under those circumstances we do not make HaTorah HaMeitiv. The Mishnah Berurah is not machriya. He says it bleibs a suffik. Since it's a suffik brachas lahakal. What does suffik brachas lahakal mean? We go l'kula and we're not mechayev you to make a bracha. Why? Because we don't want to play with Shem Shamayim Levatala. We don't want to play with a bracha Levatala, chas v'chalila. So now let's put this into real terms, right? Real terms. You have a Yom Tov Suda. You have a Yom Tov Suda, and you put out a bottle of Concord grape for Kiddush. And everybody you made a bar priagofen. That's your first bracha rishayna al yayin. It covers all the yayin that you're going to drink b'sayich hamazon. Even though Kiddush is yayin shelifnei hamazon, right? But it patters all the yayin that you're going to drink during the mazon, because in Kiddush b'makom suda, so you've got the connection of Kiddush to the suda, right? And you've got chashivusa de mitzvah, and it's a chashiv a drink, so it covers all of the yayin that you're going to drink b'sayich hamazon. Now you always had in mind, you knew that you had a Cabernet downstairs, and before Yom Tov, when you were setting up your sudas, you were talking to your wife, what are we serving for the first day meal on Yom Tov? Oh, we're going to serve the rib roast. Oh, good. I have a good bottle of Cabernet to go with the rib roast. So now, the Cabernet was in the house, and it was daitei l'shtaisam. You had in mind to serve it. So fine, you can't make HaTorah HaMeitiv. Why? Because of brachas lahakal. According to the Mechaber, you would make HaTorah HaMeitiv, but the Mishnah Berurah is machriya, halacha l'maisa, that we would not make a bracha HaTorah HaMeitiv. Now, how about if the Cabernet was downstairs and you never thought about it? And then the rib roast came out, and you take the first piece of the rib roast, this needs a geschmacka red. And, I have that bottle of Cabernet downstairs. Oh, so it was babayis, but it was not daitei l'shtoisam. You didn't have a mind to drink it. So now, pending all the other tanoim, it is eligible for HaTorah HaMeitiv. It's a new wine. It's a more chosh of a wine. It wasn't on the table by the first bar priagofen. Let's assume that you still have more of the Concord grape. So it's eligible for ha'tov והמטיב. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah, second line down near the end of the line. Says the Ramah, Hago, v'dafka shelo yahayu lefanav yachad kisheberich b'ri hagafen. But in order to make this ha'tov v'hametiv, it has to be that both wines weren't in front of you on the table when you made the first b'ri hagafen. Aval hayu b'yachad, but if you did have both wines there, ein tzarich levarich ela b'ri hagafen, then you're only going to make a b'ri hagafen k'moishe yispar sif gimel, like we're going to see spelled out in sif gimel. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut hey, shaloi hayu lefanav, if it wasn't in front of you. Now, to understand properly what the Mishnah Berurah is about to say, you have to understand one thing. Let's say when you sit down to the Suda, you did have both wines in front of you. Now, what does that mean? If you had both wines in front of you at the beginning of the Suda, you had a Concord grape and you had a Cabernet. So you have one bottle that's more chashuv than the other bottle. And now you want to make a b'ri hagafen. Which one do you have to make the bracha on? You have to make the bracha on the Cabernet, because you have to make the bracha on the one that's more chashuv. Unless you mamish don't like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. You're not mechuyev to make a bracha on something that you don't want to drink because you don't like it. But if you like it, and it's more chashuv, and now you want to make a bracha, so we learned about kedima in brachas. There's halachos of kedimas when it comes to brachas. So the more chashuv one, you're making a bracha, you take the one that's more chashuv. Remember all those halachos that we learned about when you make hamoitzi on the pas, on the challah, you have to make sure to take from the right part of the challah because it has to be the most chashuv. So if you have a Cabernet and a Concord grape, they're both on the table. So you had to make the hagafen on the one that's more chashuv. In that case, right away you blew away any possibility of ha'tov v'hametiv. Because now what? You made the original b'ri hagafen on the more chashuv a bottle. Now all you have left is a Concord grape. You're not going to make ha'tov v'hametiv of the Concord grape. The Concord grape is gerua. It's less chashuv than the Cabernet. So with these two bottles, if you have a third bottle downstairs, now you have a special reserve Cabernet. So okay, you'll have again the possibility of ha'tov v'hametiv. But understand that. So says the Mishnah. So says the Ramah said, you could only have ha'tov v'hametiv if both bottles weren't in front of you at the time of b'ri hagafen. Because if they were both in front of you, then you're only going to have a b'ri hagafen on the one that's more chashuv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Oi sha'avaru berich ala gerua tchila, or you could have the possibility of ha'tov v'hametiv even if both bottles were in front of you by the b'ri hagafen. Why? You transgressed the halacha. You ignored the kedima, and maybe you did it inadvertently. Maybe you forgot the halacha, and you went ahead and you made the original bracha on the Concord grape, despite the fact that the Cabernet was there. Then you could still make ha'tov v'hametiv. So what we're seeing over here is, it's not so much the idea that both bottles were on the table. It's more a technicality, the Ramah seems to be saying. If both bottles were on the table, so then you already made the b'ri hagafen on the more chashuv one, then you don't have a chance of ha'tov v'hametiv anymore. Ela b'ri hagafen, ritzayin loymar, al yayin ha'meshubach. You're only going to make a b'ri hagafen on the better wine. So then, the second wine, the Concord grape, is potter from any bracha. It's covered from the bracha rishayna b'ri hagafen on the b'ri hagafen you made on the Cabernet, and it's potter from ha'tov v'hametiv because it's not more chashuv than the Cabernet. V'chein pasku ha'achroidim. Now we go to Sif Beis. Sif Beis, 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch near the end of the line. Mevarchin ha'tov v'hametiv al kol shino yayin min hastam. Generally speaking, says the Mechaber, you would always make, again, this is in the world of the Mechaber, where when they brought wine to the table, you don't know if the second wine is more chashuv than the first wine. You don't know precisely what it is. It's not, nowadays, you bring it to the table, you know exactly what it is. You read the label on the back, and you find out if it has notes of cotton candy or cedar wood or French fries. Then it was a jug. What made it a different wine? It was fermented in a different barrel. So, says the Mechaber, you don't know if you should make ha'tov v'hamitiv or not on the second wine. Is it more chashuv? Is it not more chashuv? We have Rashi in the Rashbam. You only make ha'tov v'hamitiv if the second one is more chashuv, or at least you're mesupik if it's more chashuv. Says the Mechaber, mevarch ha'tov v'hamitiv al kol shini yayin min hastam. The default position would be, says the Mechaber, to make ha'tov v'hamitiv on the second wine. Even if you don't know for a fact that the second wine is more chashuv. Why? Because you're at least mesupik that it might be. So that's the Rashbam. You're at least mesupik it might be more chashuv. Kol she'eni yedei shu garua mimenu. So long as you don't know that the second wine is of lesser chashivas than the first wine, by default you make ha'tov v'hamitiv. So again, we saw Rashi in the Rashbam. Rashi didn't even speak about a suffix. Rashi said the second wine has to be more chashuv. The Rashbam, and then the way Taisus explains the Rashbam, it is that the second wine is more chashuv, or at least you're mesupik that it's more chashuv. Says the Mechaber, what does that mean? The Mechaber says that means that default, you make ha'tov v'hamitiv on the second wine. Unless you have reason to believe that it's of lesser value. If you have reason to believe it's of lesser cheshivus, then you can't make ha'tov v'hamitiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Sheini yodei shehu garua. Avalim yodei shehu garua afilu ma'at. But if you know that it's of lesser cheshivus, even a little bit, lo yavarach alav. You can't make ha'tov v'hamitiv av shehu min acher, even though it's a different wine. Mimenu ois katan ches. The Chavetz Chaim is being very medayik in the lashon of the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, when don't you make, when you could make ha'tov v'hamitiv, so long as you don't know that the second wine is garua mimenu, is of lesser chashivas than the first wine that you drank. So the comparison is bedafka between the second wine that you drank and the first wine that you drank. As long as you don't know that the second wine is garua from the first wine, you can still make ha'tov v'hamitiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasav HaTaz, the Taz writes, Dafke imu mistapik shemahu garua rak mimenu. The only time you could still make ha'tov v'hamitiv is if you're only misupik that the second wine might be worse, right? The Mechaber said, in order to not make, the default is you do make ha'tov v'hamitiv. In order to not make ha'tov v'hamitiv, you need to know that the second wine is lesser to the first wine. If you're only misupik, then you do make ha'tov v'hamitiv. Says the Taz, but look what the Mechaber wrote. The suffix is that it might be less chashiv than the first wine that you drank. But what if you're mesupik? Avalimu mistapik shemahu gerua ma'oid. But if your suffix is not, the first wine that I had was azoi, and it had mamish, it had notes of cotton candy and strawberries. And the second wine that I'm going to drink now, I don't know if it really lives up to the first wine that I drank. It might be a little bit less chashuv than the first wine. In that case, the Mechaber said you could still make ha'tov v'hamitiv. But what if the second wine, your mesupik, it might be junk. Your mesupik, it might really be bad. So you took out a bottle and you smelled the cork and you don't know. I'm not even sure. It could be that this bottle is corky. Like, I'm not sure. This bottle might be bad. In that case, says the Taz, that kind of suffix, avalimu mistapik shemahu gerua ma'oid ha'cheina roy lishtoi salam yidoichik lo yavarach alav berchas ha'tov v'hamitiv. So, in other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is telling us is, again, let's just put it back into context. The Mechaber is really going according to the Rashbam al limud de Tosfos. So he's telling you that the default position is to make ha'tov v'hamitiv on the second wine. You don't have to know that the second wine is more chashiv. So long as you do not know that the second wine is less chashiv, right? So misafik, you still make ha'tov v'hametiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah from the Taz, yeah, but it depends what the suffix is. If the suffix is that the second wine might not live up to the first wine, it might be lesser to the first wine, it's a suffix, you can still make ha'tov v'hametiv. But if the suffix is that it might be garbage, then you don't make ha'tov v'hametiv. We're going to stop over here, and we will continue next time with the Ramah, 4 lines off the bottom. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah, the source of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Ram should send Yeshua Sefruas Parnas and Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to the Geula Shlema with the Bias Koil Tzedek B'mehera v'yameinu Amen. Be well, and everybody have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Be well.